While horror games like Resident Evil, Silent Hill, and Dead Space feature iconic and terrifying monster designs that'll keep you up at night, truth be told that in some cases there's some sort of organization or cult working in the background that are far more dangerous than these giant creatures. And on this episode of Nerdspace Games, I want to shine a light on a lot of those terrifying cults and horror games as I give you guys the most dangerous ones. Whether it's because of their abilities, influence, or even the type of rituals they perform, these 10 cults prove to be the most dangerous organizations seen in horror games. Before we get started though, I want to give a quick spoiler warning for today's video. Since I'll be diving into some lore details around each of these cults on today's list, it means we'll have to be spoiling key details about each of the games that these cults appear in. So with that in mind, I'll have timestamps down below, and if we get to a game that you don't want to be spoiled on, feel free to skip ahead. Oh, and by the way, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel for more survival horror content. Also, hit that like button if you enjoyed today's topic. Anyway, my name is Ruben with Nerdspace Games, and this is my top 10 most dangerous cults in horror games. Let's get it. Number 10, Cult of the Tree, Alan Wake 2. The Cult of the Tree is the perfect example of a cult meaning well, but going about it the wrong way in some cases. Actually, they are the successor of a previous cult, the Torchbearers, that were essentially the protectors of Bright Falls. See, the town of Bright Falls has a history with the darkness that surrounds it, and because of that, some of the villagers have come together to form the Cult of the Tree. Spoilers for Alan Wake 2, but this cult is actually trying to prevent the darkness from spreading by capturing anybody that returns from the dark world and performing a ritual on them that involves ripping out their heart and using a clicker to fill their insides with light. Yeah, it sounds kind of horrible, but for the most part, it did protect the town from the darkness. Unfortunately, because of how close they get to the darkness, some of the members would ultimately be changed into the very things that they fought against, the Tekken. Also, they would be a little drastic in misunderstand situations to the point where they would hide the truth from the FBC and the FBI, despite the help that those organizations could provide. In fact, when Alan Wake was detained by the FBI, the cult members would attack the lodge in which Alan Wake is being hidden at in order to kill him for fear of him becoming Mr. Scratch. Therefore, they would kind of oppose the FBI in some cases. For that reason and more, the Cult of the Tree became a danger to the entire town for their rash and dangerous actions as well as their poor decision making. Yet because of the good that they did up until the start of the game and what they did try to accomplish, Cult of the Tree falls right here at the bottom of today's list. Number 9, the Red Crown Aristocrats Club, Royal Rose. Feels wrong calling a small group of kids and their club a cult, but when you dive deeper into the backstory of this club and their actions, there's a lot of comparisons that could be made between their little club and other cults on this list. The story in this cult is a bit hard to follow, so try to stick with me here. Essentially, a group of kids at the Rose Garden Orphanage formed a small society known as the Red Crown Aristocrats Club. Here, the members of the club were ranked by their popularity within the orphanage. Every day, the club would give a task in which the members would need to find a special gift and bring it to the club room's box. Doing so will grant them access to the club room. The club was led by Wendy, who founded the club and named herself the Princess of the Red Rose. Over time, the club would get more and more violent to the point where there were theories surrounding the death of adults connected to the orphanage. Things ultimately took a turn for the worse though when Wendy met Jennifer. See, Jennifer was an orphan too, though she wasn't staying at the orphanage. Instead, she was found by a father that lost his son, and he took Jennifer in and dressed her up as his deceased son. Yeah, it gets worse. When Wendy met Jennifer, she brought her to the orphanage and had her join the club, aka Cult. However, Jennifer found a new friend in the form of a dog, Brown. When Wendy became jealous, she ordered the club to bully Jennifer consistently and then ultimately killed the dog. This set Jennifer off on Wendy, in which the rest of the club realized all the bad that they had done under Wendy's rule, and they dethroned her, naming Jennifer as the new Princess of the Red Rose. Unfortunately, things didn't stop here though, as Wendy dressed up as a boy herself, found the man that took Jennifer in, and pretended to be his son, all in an effort to manipulate him into attacking and hurting the rest of the orphans. This backfired when the man killed all of the orphans, including Wendy, when he realized she wasn't his son, leaving Jennifer as the sole survivor of Rose Garden Orphanage. Despite being a club organized by a young, bedridden orphan girl, the Red Crown Aristocrats Club rivals that of other clubs in horror games in the way that she was able to manipulate this small group of kids into committing some awful crimes, which included murder. Number 8, Seraphites, The Last of Us Part 2. Also known as the Scars, the Seraphites are a religious cult in The Last of Us 2 that was started by an unnamed woman known as the Prophet. The Seraphites were created in the early days of the outbreak, and the core belief of this group of people was that the infection was a sign from God that the human race had become too attached to modern technology and that they should live off of the land going forward as their ancestors had done before them. One notable thing about the Seraphites is the fact that they would mark their faces by giving themselves scars to acknowledge the imperfection of mankind, hence the nickname they were given, Scars. While the Scars were always dangerous and violent, it wasn't until the death of the Prophet that led them to becoming even more dangerous and going against the very same beliefs that brought them together. For example, before the death of the Prophet, Seraphites believed that every man and woman should be treated the same regardless of their rank within the cult. However, after the death of the Prophet, there was a change in this ideology. Higher ranking officials within the cult would get first dibs on rations and their choice of food, and then the leftovers would be pushed down the ranks before eventually landed at the bottom of the totem pole, which in some cases left the lowest ranking members of the cult with nothing at all to eat. Also, the men were forced to shave their heads and women were forced to braid their hair. Higher ranking men were also entitled to a single wife. As you can see, the Seraphites were basically hypocrites for believing in equality while also having rules like this. Now, we don't know if all or any of these things changed before or after the death of the Prophet, but based on what she believed in, I would assume all of these hypocritical changes came after her death. They also started to perform human sacrifices on their enemies in what they believed was a way to atone for the sins of the human race. These sacrifices were in the form of gutting their enemies and hanging them afterwards. Outside of that, the only other notable thing about the Seraphites is that they used whistling as a form of communication and that their home base was on an island to keep them safe and secure from the WLF and Fedra's reach. Number 7. Cult of Cthulhu, Call of Cthulhu. There are plenty of dangerous and terrifying cults to choose from in video games that are based on the works of H.P. Lovecraft. In Dark Corners of the Earth, you have the Fellowship of the Yeath. In the Sinking City, you have the Church of the Lord of the Woods, and you also have the KKK in that game. However, if we are looking at the most dangerous cults in video games, none of the ones in Lovecraft-inspired horror games are more dangerous than the Cult of Cthulhu in the game Call of Cthulhu. In this game, the player follows Edward Pierce as he heads to Darkwater Island to solve the mystery of the death of the Hawkins family. During his investigation, he learns that the island is being run by a secret cult that worships an ancient being known as the Leviathan. Long ago, Leviathan lured a crew of fishermen to it and provided its own flesh for them to feed on. In doing so, the fishermen lost their sense of free will, gained a sense of immortality, and essentially became puppets to the Leviathan, in which they created the Cult of Cthulhu. These cultists were high-ranking members within the village, which included the Doctor of Riverside, a captain of a local fishing boat, and Charles Hawkins, the son-in-law of the man that hired Edward Pierce to investigate the murder of the Hawkins family. Basically, Leviathan's goal is to fill the human race with enough fear and insanity that they would succumb to its influence and become its puppet. This cult has the ability to manipulate people by turning them into mindless puppets, gain a sense of immortality, heal fatal wounds with their green oil, and even resurrect the dead via the same oil that was extracted from the essence of the Leviathan. Number 6. The Testament of the New Ezekiel, Outlast 2. Outlast 2 might very well be one of the most fucked up games on this list. Essentially, the game is based on the apocalypse and the birth of the Antichrist. Well, sort of, as it's implied that all of that is not real. I know it's complicated, but that's for a whole different video. Anyway, in the game, Blake and his wife Lynn find themselves trapped in the middle of a war between religious cults after crash landing in the wilderness near the town of Templegate. Long story short, it's revealed that Lynn is to give birth to the Antichrist, and each group in and around this town has a different approach of how they want to handle it. In the case of today's video, we'll be focusing on the Testament of the New Ezekiel. Now, believe it or not, the cult is actually trying to prevent the birth of the Antichrist, which would essentially end the world. Well, again, sort of, as a lot of these things aren't actually happening and are not real. Unfortunately, they go about it in some extremely disturbing and violent ways that ultimately make them almost worse than the people trying to bring on the apocalypse. See, the leader of the cult, Sullivan Noth, believed that God had become unhappy with the current churches and he was supposed to be the new prophet. After gaining a large following, Noth began to order the women of the cult to give birth constantly, to which Noth himself would get involved with. Pervert, I know. From here, Noth led his cult into the wilderness when police began investigating his and his cult's crimes. Here, he established the town of Templegate, which becomes one of the main settings of Outlast 2. Of course, there were already indigenous tribes living here on this land, but Noth executed them in service of God, or so he says. While in Templegate, Noth passed on new messages that allowed him to take advantage of his own cult. He claimed that the Antichrist would be born from his own flock. He also stated that for that reason, killing children is okay as it would prevent the birth of the Antichrist. Oh, and he passed a new rule that stated that he can sleep with whoever he wanted to, including incest if he felt like it. Yeah, again, pervert. All in all, Knott's cult raped women, killed children, and tortured and killed not only outsiders but members of their own cult in favor of Knott's desires. Number 5, The Order, Silent Hill. The Order is a recurring organization in the Silent Hill franchise. In fact, despite almost every Silent Hill game being a standalone story within the universe, the Order is actually connected to just about every game of the Silent Hill franchise. The Order is a cult organization that was founded around the same time that Silent Hill became a tourist destination. Under the guidance of the High Priestess and leader of the Order, Dahlia Gillespie, this religious cult slowly gained more influence and power over the town of Silent Hill. In their rise to power, they murder high-ranking officials within the town and replace them with people they could control. For example, the previous mayor and his private investigator were killed by the cult when he tried to shut down the drug operation that was going on within the town. On that topic, Dahlia teamed up with Dr. Michael Kaufman in developing PTV, a highly addictive drug that would be used to finance the cult. In fact, this very same drug was given to Lisa Garland, a nurse at Acamilla Hospital, and then after she became addicted, Kaufman would force her to take care of Alessa Gillespie in the basement of the hospital in exchange for more PTV. The Order carried over into other games of the franchise, even after the death of Dahlia Gillespie. In Silent Hill 3, we see the cult return with a new leader, Claudia Wolf, in which he tracks down Heather Mason, the reincarnation of Alessa Gillespie from the first game. We also see remnants of the cult in Silent Hill Homecoming as well, in which we see some of the members flee and establish a new town of their own, Shepherd's Glen. Dahlia Gillespie's influence still plays a major part in the franchise after her death, as Silent Hill 4 The Room follows Walter Sullivan, a serial killer who's looking to perform a ritual which consists of 21 sacrifices. And guess who motivated Walter Sullivan to commit such a crime? Dahlia Gillespie. Since the Order used Walter's orphanage, Wish House, as a way to raise the youth in their beliefs, Dahlia had met with Walter as a kid, and she was the one that told him to follow through with this ritual if he wanted to be reunited with his mother. All in all, the Order is a very dangerous cult organization that uses monsters created from Alessa and the Otherworld to their advantage, including torturing and murdering people that they deem as threats to the cult and the evil god that they worship. Number 4, The Oro, Kadim. While the Order is extremely dangerous due to the amount of influence it has over Silent Hill and the nearby settlements, the Oro is a dangerous organization for a lot of the same reasons, but on a much bigger scale. See, the objective of the Oro is simple: world domination. They want to take over the world and rebuild it in their image. The cult members enhance themselves in different ways to dispose of their enemies. For example, most of the cult members have gone through some brutal experiments and surgeries that leaves them disfigured and deformed. In return, they gain special abilities like implants that allow their vocals to emit vibrations are strong enough to destroy flesh and bone. Yet one of the more dangerous abilities is the fact that they can cause insanity with their voices to the point where they can influence victims to become aggressive and violent, leading to their targets going on a bloody rampage. The Oro comes in different forms throughout both games, including creepy crawling enemies. Considering their abilities, their in-game plans, and the influence that they have on the world as a whole, the Oro are easily one of the more dangerous cults in horror games. In fact, we even see a scene at the end of the second game that implies that the President of the United States is also a member of the Oro, or at the very least controlled by the cult. Number 3, Mana Religion, Forbidden Siren. Forbidden Siren is one of the most confusing and complicated games to fully understand. Between the 10 characters that you switch back and forth between, the time travel mechanics, and the alternate dimension storyline that spans over 1,300 years, it's no wonder that this game isn't the easiest horror game to follow. So before I start diving into the main cult and antagonistic group of the game, please forgive me if I start to get something wrong or I misinterpret certain situations of the story, because it's confusing as fuck, I'll say that much. Anyway, founded sometime after 684 AD, Mana Religion is the religious cult of Forbidden Siren that is led by Hisako Yao. In the year 684 AD, the village of Hanuda was suffering from famine and was desperate for food. During this time, Hisako found an alien creature known as Dadasushi. In order to help save the village, Hisako introduced the rest of the villagers to this creature and they began feeding on it. Before the creature dies though, it kills all of the villagers except one, that of course being Hisako. Instead of killing her, the creature curses her with immortality, in which she could only break the curse if she manages to revive him. Essentially, the cult created by Hisako had one purpose: to revive Dadasushi and break Hisako's curse. For the next 1300 years, Hisako would work on breaking this curse multiple times, to which she would fail on most occasions. Eventually, after waiting for so long to break the curse, her memory would begin to fail her, and it would even take longer for her to finally come close to breaking the curse. One of the failed rituals that the cult were performing brought this village into some sort of alternate dimension, which is where a majority of the first game takes place. The villagers followed the teachings of mono-religion during this time, which one of the most important rules of the religion stated that the villagers must bathe in the red water every 6 hours when the siren sounded. What the villagers didn't realize was that they were slowly giving up their free will to Darusushi, to which they became immortal at the price of becoming mindless puppets. When the most recent ritual was interrupted at the start of the game, the siren was activated, and then the villagers that were infected with the red water became Shibito, the main enemy types of the game. The red water had the ability to resurrect the dead into more Shibito, which increased Darusushi's army. Because Darusushi was an insect-like creature, the Shibito would eventually become insect-human hybrids in some cases. Even though this cult was started by a single person, her death to the alien creature Darusushi became so dangerous that it would claim the lives of an entire village and even others that find themselves trapped in this alternate dimension of Haruto Village. If it wasn't for Darusushi's resurrection being prevented at the end of the game, who knows what him, Hisako, and his cult would have achieved in terms of spreading mono-religion across the rest of the world. Number 2, Los Illuminados, Resident Evil 4. This is probably the most famous cult in a horror game due to the popularity of Resident Evil 4 and its remake. The game follows Leon S. Kennedy as he's sent on a mission to rescue the president's daughter, Ashley, who has been kidnapped and taken to a small village in Spain. Upon arriving at said village, Leon learns that he is actually up against a cult that is using some sort of ancient parasite to infect the villagers, enhance their abilities, and ultimately turn them into mindless puppets. The cult leader, Osmond Saddler, plans on using this ancient parasite known as Las Plagas to infect the president's daughter, send her back to the president in exchange for money, and then, with her as his puppet, order her to infect the president of the United States. Los Illuminados, Saddler's cult, basically has one goal in mind: world domination. He wants to use the parasite to infect the entire world, to which he could essentially become a god. In hindsight, the guy seems to have a similar god complex as the rest of the Resident Evil villains of the franchise. Albert Wesker, Oswald E. Spencer, you get the point. Anyway, Los Illuminados, which means the Enlightened Ones, was founded in the 1800s after a pagan cult discovered the ancient parasite that would later be known as Las Plagas. This cult would then use the parasite to increase their ranks by force. Eventually, the Salazar family would step in to stop the cult, steal the parasite, and hide it under Castle Salazar so that nobody would ever abuse the power of Las Plagas ever again. Unfortunately, centuries later, the son of a bitch known as Ramon Salazar would be manipulated by Osmond Saddler into joining Saddler's cult and finding the parasite. Once found, Saddler would then spread the parasite across the village, infecting everyone, including the children of the village. Unfortunately, while the parents became puppets of Saddler, the children didn't survive the side effects of the parasite and they were killed by it. As you can see, Los Illuminados is easily one of the most dangerous cults in not only a horror game, but video games in general, for the mere fact that its leader, Osmond Saddler, had the ability to turn the entire planet into mindless puppets. And had Leon not intervened, he could have succeeded in his mission of world domination. Number 1, Unitology, Dead Space. Dead Space takes place in a distant future in which Earth is at the brink of destruction due to the energy crisis that the planet and the human race are facing. For that reason, miners have been sent all over the planet to dig up precious resources. During this search, the colonies of Earth come across an alien device deep underground known as the Black Marker. The marker appeared to be the solution to the energy crisis as it provided unlimited and sustainable energy. However, it did have some side effects on people in its vicinity. The two most notable side effects being hallucinations and, more importantly, the ability to reanimate nearby dead tissues and turn them into necromorphs, the main enemy types of the Dead Space franchise. While the colonies of Earth researched the marker, including making a replicated version of it known as the Red Marker, they also chose to keep the existence of these markers hidden from the world. That is until a researcher, Michael Altman, revealed the truth to the world, which ultimately created a mass panic regarding the fact that Earth government hid such a big secret from them. Unfortunately, after his mysterious death that would be used as a martyr by a radical group, the Unitology Church would be formed with millions of devoted people pledging their allegiance to this new and dangerous religion. It's reasonable to assume that the entire concept of Unitology may have been created by the marker's influence itself, since both the marker and the cult's religion shared similar goals. See, as I stated earlier, one of the side effects of the marker was the fact that it reanimates dead tissues near it and turns that tissue into necromorphs. What I didn't say is that the necromorphs serve some sort of hive mind created from the marker, which has only one goal in mind: bringing more dead tissues to the marker to increase their ranks. And the Unitology religion believed that the marker was the key to eternal life. In order to receive this gift though, you would need to die first in the presence of a marker. On top of that, the teachings of Unitology also stated that all churches aboard ships across the universe were to have a morgue in which the dead could be preserved. Do you see how Unitology and the marker's goal intersect here? People devoted to the Unitology believed they needed to bring themselves and as many people as possible to the markers and then die. In doing so, the marker would revive their bodies as more necromorphs. Essentially, Unitology was the marker's greatest weapon, as they literally would bring the marker flesh to reanimate and join the hive mind. Why? All because these crazy motherfuckers believed that they would be rewarded in an eternal life in which they would become one. Well, they were right about one thing. They do become one with a homicidal alien hive mind that literally just wants to destroy all living life across the universe. No big deal, right? Overall, Unitology is definitely the most dangerous cult ever seen in video games. It was created from an alien device that essentially planted the seeds of doubt via its influence to then create the Unitology cult, a large group of people dedicated to bringing the marker exactly what it wanted: more dead people. Considering that this cult literally brought not only the world but an entire universe to the brink of extinction based on what they believed in, it's no wonder that the cult of Unitology claims the #1 spot on today's list. But that does it for this episode of Nerd Space Games. Hit up the comments and let me know what you think of my list. Is the Unitology cult of Dead Space the most dangerous cult in a horror game, or is there a different cult deserving of that title? Let me know down below. Also, let me know if there are any other cults and horror games that deserve a spot on this list. Anyway, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to my channel for more survival horror content. Also, leave a like on today's video if you enjoyed today's topic. But thanks for watching, and as always, I'll catch you guys on the next episode of Nerd Space Games. Take care.